All right, welcome in, my lovelies. So good to see you guys again. And just in case you were here last night and you heard my introduction, you heard me say, "Yeah, we're going to do this tomorrow night, and then you're going to have the exam on Monday." That you don't have your exam on Monday. I think you know that. I just wanted to make sure that you weren't thinking that I knew something you didn't know and that it was actually on Monday. It is not on Monday. It is on Tuesday. So that's just wanted to clear that up. Anyway, so glad to have you here. We're going to go through government units 3, 4, and 5 tonight, which will round out the rest of the course. Go through some of the top level things that you need to know. And by the way, if you want to follow along, I've got some notes that you can follow along with that are linked down in the description. There's also a pinned comment there. So if anybody asks about it, make sure that somebody sees it, point them down below, so that they can get it as well. This will be about 90 minutes-ish. The content portion of it will be about 90 minutes. And if you want to do the super chats to do a shout out, then that's great. I will do those. I'll do a few of them between the units, but I'll do most of them at the end. So if you submit a super chat, make sure you have just have a sense of when you sent it, like write it down, something like that. Because as I'm reading them, I'll make sure to tell you like what time I'm reading from and when they were submitted. It would be great if I could just be like, as soon as they come in, I just say them or whatever. But alas, you guys need to study and I need to help you out with that. So I will say on the topic of super chats, and we'll get right into it here in just a second, 3 of them did come through last night before the time, and I did not read them. My mistake. So I just want to go ahead and get that out of the way now so that I don't forget. And get those over here. First one's from Dark Gladiator. Go Rachel Carr from Wiley East. Tung Tough. If that's the same Rachel Carr I know, then that's fantastic. Love it. And then from Chris Kemjor. Hey Heimler, you're the reason I got a 5 last year, and I'm going to name my firstborn child after you. Hope you don't have my complaints. Hey, no complaints on that. You got to go with what your heart tells you. And then finally, Clary Kim. Shout out to Mr. Jason Gapa. There it is. Okay, so those are the 3 that I missed last night. So sorry. I hope you guys are here to hear those. And if anybody knows them and they're not here, let them know. So I think we ought to just get started, but I don't know. We also have a tradition around here, and that tradition is that I begin things with a small bit of levity. And tonight I want to tell you about the time I went recently to go buy some bees from a local beekeeper down the road. And I go up to him and I say, "Hey, I need a dozen bees." He puts them in a container, he hands them to me, and I look and I say, "Wait, there's 13 bees in here." There's 13 bees. There's 13 bees in here, not 12. And the beekeeper says, "Oh, that's a freebie." I couldn't even get through it. It's a good one. Yes, indeed. Yes, I did use that in last year's A-Push, but as I was searching my heart tonight for the right joke, that one just kept presenting itself. Still funny a year later, still funny. And if y'all were here last night, and I was having some real struggles with my voice after a while, got some tea, got a lozenge, got all sorts of things to help it not be that way anymore. But if whatever's going on in my throat starts happening and I cough and I'm just not going to name it. It's there. Sorry. Love you guys. This is how it goes. Show must go on. So all that to say, I say we go ahead and get this party started. So let's begin with Unit 3. Unit 3, Civil Liberties and Civil Rights. Okay, first big idea. The Bill of Rights protects individual liberties. Okay, now, U.S. Constitution includes a Bill of Rights, and that's the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. They are specifically designed to protect individual liberties and rights, and even more to the point, those are enacted in order to protect individuals in their civil liberties from intrusion from the federal government. Okay, now, when the Bill of Rights was first written, first ratified, the protection of these liberties did not include protection from state governments. That didn't come till after the Civil War, and it's a whole thing that we'll get into. But over time, the Supreme Court has interpreted and reinterpreted the meaning of these liberties in order to expand or contract personal liberties. And we could go into 1,000 different examples of that, but you have to realize when we're talking about the Bill of Rights and how Supreme Court cases relate to them, they're either contracting civil liberties or they're expanding civil liberties. And the court's interpretation always falls along a very particular scale. That scale on one side is public interest and public safety, and on the other side, it's personal freedom. And maybe one thing more than any that I want you to get into your brain folds and stick them there and never forget them is that the liberties that are contained within that Bill of Rights, these liberties are not absolute. Okay, I'm going to expand on that as we go tonight, but those liberties are not absolute. Just because it protects freedom of speech doesn't mean you can say anything you want at any time, at any place. It's not what it means, okay? That's what I want you to remember. And that leads us to big idea number 2. The Supreme Court has engaged in an ongoing debate over the First Amendment's protection of the freedom of religion, centered on balancing majoritarian religious practices and free exercise. Okay, so when it comes to the freedom of religion, we'll start there. There are 2 clauses in the First Amendment that you really need to know. Number 1, the Establishment Clause. Number 2, the Free Exercise Clause. So the Establishment Clause protects the civil liberty of, it prevents the federal government from either endorsing or creating a state religion, a state church, that sort of thing. The Free Exercise Clause says that the federal government cannot infringe on the legitimate free exercise of someone's religious practices. Now, those 2 clauses have been the subject of ongoing debate, and, the attempt is always to try to balance the majoritarian religious practices with free exercise, okay? And 2 very important cases, required cases that you need to know, put that tension on display. First is Engel v. Vitale. Now, that was in 1962. The complaint in that, I'm not going to go through these cases in too much detail, but the basic complaint in that case was that, mandatory public school prayer, they argued, violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Ultimately, the decision was that, mandatory public prayer in school did violate the Establishment Clause, but also, because of the 14th Amendment, the state of New York was forbidden to endorse religion as well. That's something that we're going to get into a lot. If there's one theme that sort of like dominates tonight, it is the 14th Amendment. If you're going to forget every amendment in this course and only remember one, you're probably going to do best to remember the 14th Amendment. I'm not saying that's the only one that's going to be on the exam, but it does show up a whole lot, especially in this unit, because it's very, very important. Now, that was the Engel case. The second case that puts that, majoritarian religious exercise versus majoritarian religious practices versus free exercise tension on display is Wisconsin v. Yoder. I saw some of you guys mentioning that, hoping to the good Lord that is going to show up on your FRQs. And for your sake, I hope that it does. And I don't have any inside information. I don't know anything about this, but I love you guys. So I hope it does, if that's what you're feeling good about. Anyway, back to the program. Wisconsin v. Yoder. So the complaint here was that compulsory schooling after 8th grade violated the free exercise, the protection of the free exercise of religion among Amish communities who wanted their kids to stay home after 8th grade. Ultimately, the decision was that the court ruled that it did violate the Free Exercise Clause because requiring these children to continue in school would expose them to values that ran counter to their community's religious beliefs. And so, you remember, I talked about the tension. Balancing free exercise, public safety, public interest with individual liberty. These 2 cases are a clear example of the court ruling in favor of individual liberty, okay? That leads us on to big idea number 3. The First Amendment's protection of freedom of speech is not absolute, as I already said, but in order to restrict speech, the government has a high bar to reach. So, can the government restrict speech? Yes, it can. Is it easy for the government to restrict speech? No, it is not. So the key case for symbolic speech, the protection of symbolic speech, was Tinker v. Des Moines. That's 1969. In that case, school administrators suspended students for wearing black armbands in protest of the Vietnam War, and they were like, "Hey, this is gonna, disrupt class." Vietnam War was very contentious. Ultimately, the court decided that the administration had violated. They did violate the First Amendment right to symbolic speech for these students, and the administration, they were fearing the disruption that would cause, but the court argued, there wasn't any actual disruption. It was just you were afraid of that disruption. So, ultimately the ruling said, no, the administration, really their only motivation was to silence these students' protests. So now, ultimately, as the court has considered First Amendment speech cases, they're working to maintain that balance between social order and individual freedom. As I said before, that's very important to remember. And so when it comes to free speech, over time, the court has decided that speech can be restricted, but as I said, there's a high bar to reach, and speech can only be restricted on the following conditions. Number one, time, place, and manner regulations. Okay, so the ruling was that the government can restrict the freedom of speech, but they can't restrict the content of that speech. The words that are flapping out of your mouth hole. They can only silence or regulate the time in which you flap your mouth hole, the place in which you flap your mouth hole, and the manner in which you flap your mouth hole. Okay. So the time, place, and manner. That's one bar that they have to reach. The second legitimate way that the government can restrict speech is if it's defamatory speech, if it's offensive, if it's obscene, even if it's symbolic, obscene statements, obscene gestures. The First Amendment does not protect these. This is in the interest of public safety and public interest, right? And then finally, third, the government can restrict speech if that speech presents a clear and present danger, okay? This came out of a ruling in 1919 called Schenck v. the United States. And long story short, a guy was distributing literature, telling American men to avoid the draft for World War I, and so the court ruled that you can't actually do that because there's a very pronounced public safety issue with you trying to get people to not enlist. So those are the three conditions for restricting speech, and if it's going to happen, it's very hard to clear that bar, which is why it almost never happens. And that's a good thing. And that leads us, ladies and gentlemen, to big idea number 4. Okay, the First Amendment's protection of the freedom of the press is essential to the working of a democracy. If you are going to have a democracy, you have to have a free press. That's just how it works. The politicians are out there doing their thing. We elected them. Remember last night, popular sovereignty, social contract. In the American form of government, the people are the ones who have the power, and we sort of lend that power to our politicians to make policy on our behalf. And the only way we're going to know what they're doing over there in Washington, D.C. and in the state governments and all that is if we have newspapers and reporters who are giving us that information so that we can then hold those politicians accountable or say, hey, you're doing a great job. So generally speaking, the same standards are applied when it comes to the First Amendment protection of the press. Same standards are applied to the press that are applied to speech. It's very difficult to silence the news from a legal standpoint. And that's a big reason for that is because the court bolstered the freedom of the press through a case called New York Times v. the United States in 1971. Long story short, President Nixon wanted to shut down the publication of some leaked classified documents about the Vietnam War. That frankly made him look really bad. And the New York Times wanted to publish this, and he wanted to shut it down in the name of national security. Well, ultimately, the court ruled in favor of the New York Times, saying that, cries for national security, excuse me, don't justify prior restraint. Okay, and prior restraint is the term for when the government, has the right to restrict the content of printed material before it is printed, and that the justification is almost always national security. You can't print this because it's going to cause some real national security problems. But again, with this court case, that option for invoking prior restraint, it's very high, very difficult to reach. And that leads us to big idea number 5. We're cooking tonight, guys. We're cooking. Yes, the Pentagon Papers. Yes, that's what they are, indeed. No, I don't have any FRQ predictions. My mind doesn't work that way. I wish it did. Okay, let's go back to big idea number 5. The Supreme Court's interpretation of the Second Amendment has almost always upheld an individual's right to own a gun. Oh, good. Something that's not controversial at all, but we're just dealing with the facts here. So a very significant case in Second Amendment case history was the District of Columbia v. Heller in 2008. This is not one of your required Supreme Court cases, but it is very, very helpful to know. And it is in the curriculum as well. So in this case, a security guard in Washington, D.C., he wanted to carry his revolver home with him for personal safety. And the gun laws that were in D.C. at the time basically made owning a gun for self-defense about impossible. So, there was like trigger lock regulations. The point is, if somebody broke into your home, there would be like, you need to say, hey, just hold on for like 10 minutes while I unlock this and do this. It wouldn't work. So in this case, the court ruled actually in Heller's favor and established for the first time an official interpretation of the Second Amendment that upheld an individual's right to own a gun. Now, we're going to go further on the Second Amendment later, but now let's go to big idea number 6. So again, none of the rights in the Bill of Rights are absolute. Absolute. Each right is always a balancing act between individual liberty and public order and safety. Okay? It's kind of reiterating what we've said before, but man, these are important. So here, we're just going to have sort of a junk drawer of how the several other amendments have been interpreted in light of this balancing between individual liberty and public order. So let's go with the 8th Amendment first, okay? The 8th Amendment prevents cruel and unusual punishment and excessive bail. And so that has led to debates among the states about the death penalty and torture. And when it comes to the death penalty, the 5th Amendment says, we're in the heading of the 8th Amendment here, but let's just take a little detour over into the 5th Amendment. The 5th Amendment says that a person can be deprived of life just as long as it's done within the confines of the due process of law. But through various Supreme Court cases, states have either restricted or expanded the application of the death penalty. And I'm not going to get into those cases now. You just need to know that it's been some states allow death penalties, some do not. They interpret it differently. Then we'll move on from the 8th Amendment and talk about debates that have gone on around the 2nd and the 4th Amendments. So with respect to the 4th Amendment, which offers protection or enshrines protection against unwarranted searches and seizures, you have privacy in your own papers and affairs, etc. So one of the big modern debates over the 4th Amendment is, does the collection of metadata interfere with public safety and individual rights? And then on the Second Amendment front, does gun regulation promote or interfere with public safety and individual rights? And so on the Second Amendment side, the gun rights debate is always inflamed by mass shootings. You guys have been alive long enough to know that anytime there's a mass shooting, this debate comes right back up. So like a few years ago, there was a shooting in Las Vegas, killed like 60 people, wounded a little more than 400, I think. And as a result of that, several states banned something called bump stocks. And that, basically those are, I don't know anything about guns, so, forgive me if I'm saying this wrong, but a bump stock, as I understand it, turns, a semi-automatic weapon and basically into a fully automatic weapon. And so as a result of that shooting, that the gun rights debate flared up just as it always does. And there was, meaningful legislation put into place as a result in response to that event. Then when it comes to that balance with the Fourth Amendment, the Fourth Amendment protects citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures of property. And then more recently, after September 11th, the attacks of September 11th, 2001, President George W. Bush signed into law the Patriot Act. It was a program that allowed the federal government to interfere with third-party cell phone carriers in order to search for leads on suspected terrorists by collecting metadata from cell phones. Now, metadata, in case you don't know, is like all the information about communication with the exception of the content of the communication itself. So when was the call made? How long was it? From whom? To whom? That sort of thing. And where from? Whatever. And in the wake of 9/11, Americans for a while were like, yeah, okay, that's fine. We don't want another terrorist plot. The government's going to uncover it. That's great. But over time, when the extent of this data collection on Americans was leaked by a guy named Edward Snowden, who was a national security agency contractor, American citizens began to wonder if that kind of collection and the scope of it and the extent of it, with the federal government being able to look at their communication and the metadata that indicates who called whom and all that. And there was a new debate over whether that was a violation of Fourth Amendment rights. Okay, so the big one in modern times is the collection of metadata when it comes to the Fourth Amendment. Okay, let's go on to big idea number 7. You guys good? Why no AP Euro review? It's because the way they put all of the exams that I cover on 1 week, and it was I would have to double up on some nights. I think it would be kind of rough. Don't think I could have time, and then nobody would get my best. So I'm sorry. I love you guys. I hope the videos help. Anyway, big idea number 7. Selective incorporation. Oh my gosh. If you phased out, if you zoned out, point your ear holes this way, because selective incorporation is an important one. So selective incorporation applies the protections of the Bill of Rights to the states through the 14th Amendment's due process clause. All of these big ideas are important, but for some reason, this one is striking me as particularly important. I don't have any inside information. I don't know. I do know selective incorporation is going to be on your exam. I don't know how or why or in what capacity, but it's a big one. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, originally, the Bill of Rights only applied to protection from the federal government, okay? And then 2 things changed this. Number 1, the 14th Amendment was passed, and it has itself a due process clause, which says that no state shall abridge the rights of citizens. So this is a huge change. Like, now the Bill of Rights is protecting citizens not only from the federal government, but also from state governments too. It's hard to overstate what an important development that was. So then we get to selective incorporation. Basically, by definition, what this means is selective incorporation is the process of applying certain civil liberties to the states, but not all of them at once. Okay, and this application of the liberties in the Bill of Rights being applied to state governments, that doesn't happen all at once. That's worked out as the Supreme Court considers cases over time. So at this point, the amendments that have been selectively incorporated are the 1st, the 2nd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and the 8th. Okay? They've all been selectively incorporated through various court decisions, but I'll just give you one example, and that is the Second Amendment selective incorporation through a case called McDonald v. Chicago. So go back to the Heller decision I talked about like 5 minutes ago. The Heller decision, even though the court ruled in favor of Heller and interpreted the Second Amendment as a as a protection of an American's right to own a gun, that decision only applied to federal law. Okay, because Washington D.C. it's a weird thing. It's like it's not a state. It's a federal territory, and so it's like it's got its own sort of designation. So the Heller case didn't apply to the state level. And so the argument in McDonald v. Chicago was that states should extend protections to the Second Amendment to states. And so ultimately the court ruled that ruled in favor of that and applied the Second Amendment right to the state. So now in all states, no state can infringe upon an American's right to own a gun. Okay? That leads us to big idea number 8. In trying to balance personal liberty and public order, the court has at times ruled to restrict individual liberty and other times upheld individual liberty. Okay, so we just talked about McDonald v. Chicago. In other cases, the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of individual liberties over states' power. Okay, so it's always a balancing act between those two things, and it changes over time. For example, in Miranda v. Arizona, 1966. This is a case that established the Miranda rule, which upholds the Fifth Amendment's protection against being compelled to be a witness against yourself. And so that means that, anytime someone's arrested, they have to be read their Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you, et cetera, et cetera. That's there to uphold a person's Fifth Amendment rights. So this is an example of what is called procedural due process, which means that when agents of the government, like judges or police officers, interact with citizens in ways that could potentially violate their rights, they have to abide by a prescribed and predictable set of rules and procedures. Okay? That is procedural due process. Now, let's move on. That's protecting the Fifth Amendment. That's selective incorporation. Then let's talk about the Sixth Amendment, Gideon v. Wainwright in 1963. By the way, if you watch the video on that, one of these days I'm going to make a new one. If you watch the video on that one, Gideon v. Wainwright, there is an error in that video. I said that the case was decided on the equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment. It's not. It's the due process clause. So anyway, if you were confused, I hope you don't get that wrong. Sorry. My bad. Okay, so Gideon v. Wainwright. So guy is convicted in a Florida court, and that court did not provide him a lawyer. Okay? But the Sixth Amendment says that everybody must be provided a lawyer if they don't have one. They can't afford one. But again, that's the Bill of Rights. It only applies to federal law, federal court. So state courts were not required to do that. So in Gideon v. Wainwright, the ruling was that the 14th Amendment's due process clause required every state to apply that Sixth Amendment provision to provide a lawyer when the defendant cannot afford one. So it's not just federal anymore. It's selectively incorporated to the states with the Sixth Amendment. Okay. Now, there's something called the exclusionary rule that you're going to need to know. So the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Government officials cannot break into your house without a warrant, a court-issued warrant, and just search through your stuff and all that sort of thing. They can't do that. But there is something called the exclusionary rule, which means that evidence that officials gather that is in violation of the Fourth Amendment can be excluded from trial. It can't be used as evidence against you. And then, just for poops and giggles, you should know that the Fourth Amendment was incorporated to the states in a case called Mapp v. Ohio in 1961. That's a saucy one, but we're going to move on. Now, another big big balancing act here is over the something that's known as the right to privacy. Now, that's an interesting one because if you've read the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, there is no explicit right to privacy like there is a right to free speech, or protection against the infringement of free speech, religion, press, etc. There's not the freedom of or the right to privacy is not explicitly stated, but it is implied in several other amendments. And I won't go through all that right now. I'll just tell you how it is implied in the Fourth Amendment. And for that, let me deal with Roe v. Wade, a case from 1973. Now, in that time, many states had anti-abortion laws. Texas was among them. A woman wanted to get an abortion, but she could not legally do it under Texas law. And so at the end of the day, the court ruled that Texas law violated this woman's right to privacy as implicitly stated in the First, Fourth, Fifth, Ninth, and 14th Amendments. Okay, it's not as important that you remember all of those amendments, but just to know that the court interpreted a right to privacy within those. And so this was an example of the court ruling according to, we talked about procedural due process before. This is an example of the court ruling according to substantive due process, okay? Now, procedural due process, which I mentioned before, that's about maintaining, proper procedure for carrying out laws to make sure everybody gets the same treatment. Everybody's rights are protected. Substantive due process is about whether the laws themselves are just. And, in the Roe case, the Texas laws against abortion were negated via substantive due process. Now, you should know that that the Roe case, the Roe v. Wade case, was overturned in 2022 by another case called Dobbs v. Jackson. And remember, I said last night, it is very difficult. It is very rare for the court to overturn a precedent on account of the principle of stare decisis. And so, it took from 1973 to 2022 for it to actually happen. But in Dobbs v. Jackson, that officially overturned Roe v. Wade, and the court ruled that the Constitution does not protect the right to abortion and then returned the legislative power over abortion to the states. Okay? All right, we got two more big ideas here. Let's get through them. Stare decisis is it means let the decision stand. It's the way the court approaches their past decisions. Like, if they've decided one way, they're not often going to overturn that. Okay, we talked about that last night. All right. Big idea number 9. Constitutional provisions have inspired and supported social movements. Okay, I've been talking all about civil liberties. Now let's bring civil rights into the mix. So civil liberties, when we talk about those, we're talking about freedoms that are guaranteed by the Constitution. Okay, that's what's enshrined there in the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. Civil rights, on the other hand, is different. That's the push to make sure that all citizens are equally protected from discrimination based on their race, their national origin, their religion, gender, etc. Okay. Now, the most prominent manifestation of fighting for civil rights in recent history, in the last 100 years or so, was the civil rights movement from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. So the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment technically made Black Americans equal to white Americans, but in practice, it wasn't that way, like on the streets in reality. A key figure in this movement was Martin Luther King Jr. He wrote one of your required documents, which is a letter from a Birmingham jail. And this letter is actually King's response while he was imprisoned for nonviolently opposing Alabama's racist transportation laws. This letter is a response from King to the white clergy of that city, who urged him to wait patiently while they worked on civil rights on the legislative and the judicial level. They're like, hey, we like what you're doing. We're for it. But, you're out there causing a commotion. You should just settle down. Just be a little quieter. We will work on it while you... And King, the response is magnificent. I'm sure you've read it by now. I hope you've read it. His response is that basically, only Only those who have not been under the degrading lash of racism can rightly say, wait, just let us handle it. You just keep enduring what you're enduring. He says, no, the time for action is now. And, while racist laws should be fought in court, they must also be protested on the streets. Now, the civil rights movement for the rights of Black Americans actually inspired several other movements for expanded rights for minorities. The next one I want to mention is the women's rights movement. So in 1919, and by the way, all these movements that I'm about to mention, it's not like they just started in, the civil rights movement for Black rights didn't just start in like the 1940s. It had been going on for centuries before that, to 200 years before that. Women's rights didn't just start after the civil rights movement. It's been going on since the beginning of the nation. So I'm just listing them here for simplicity's sake. So women's rights movement, if you'll recall, the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. That recognized women's right to vote. The last of all American groups to be recognized as legitimate franchisees was women, and they got that in 1920. But even so, women still were inferior socially, and the law was not applied equally to them as well. For example, the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, and that outlawed discrimination based on race, yes, but also on sex. But those laws were basically not being enforced. And so many things I can mention about the women's rights movement. I'm only going to drop one here, and that is one of the key victories was the passage of the Title IX of the amendment, of the Education Amendment Acts in 1972. So this guaranteed that women would have the same opportunities as men in educational institutions that received federal funding. Okay. Women went on to do much more than that. For time's sake, that's all I can mention. Then there was a renewed movement for LGBTQ plus rights, and a lot of these movements gained steam after seeing the success of the nonviolent movement with the civil rights movement. So this is a movement that addresses the discrimination of the LGBTQ community. One of the big moments here was a court decision on gay marriage. Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015. The court ruled that that states that prevented same-sex marriage were violating the 14th Amendment, and so that was a big deal. Now, T's working. Now, the last civil rights movement that I want to, or the last social movement I want to mention is the pro-life movement. So I already mentioned in 1973, Roe v. Wade prevented states from outlawing abortion, and that created a huge backlash, especially among conservative and then especially among conservative religious Americans. So, and so the pro-life movement sprang up, started arguing for the rights of unborn children. That they argued that that what was that what was developing in the womb was not just a collection of cells, but actually a human being that deserved to have their rights protected. Okay, now the court rulings. My big idea went away. Too long. There it is. Okay, so what are we talking about? Social movements? Oh yeah, social movements. Okay, so one big thing you have to know about these social movements, a lot of these were very much grassroots movements. They came, the people got together, they began demanding their rights, and you're going to need to know at least a couple of examples of how the government responded to those calls for expanded rights. I'll go real quick. Number one, court rulings. Okay. Great example here is Brown v. the Board of Education in 1954. This is a required case. And at the end of the day, it mandated the desegregation, the racial desegregation of public schools. But the government also responded by the passage of various policies. I mentioned the Civil Rights Act a little bit ago. There was also a year later the Voting Rights Act in 1965, which made voting discrimination illegal. Now, even with those laws, there was still work to be done, but I just want to acknowledge that, and now we can move on. All right, last big idea of Unit 3. Grassroots movements are... or when it's like a bottom-up movement. It's the people come together and do it, not like the government does it. Okay, big idea number 10. The Supreme Court has at times allowed the restriction of civil rights of minority groups and I'm reading that wrong. The Supreme Court has at times allowed the restriction of civil rights of minority groups and at other times has protected those rights. All right, let's go through this one. Now, big example here, let's get right to the heart of the matter, is affirmative action. So affirmative action, basically, these are policies that are enacted that favor certain groups that have historically been discriminated. Now, an example here is regarding college admissions. In the case, the Regents of the University of California v. Bakke in 1978. Now, in that case, a white man was applying for admission to the University of California, and he was denied admission in favor of minority applicants. Bakke argued that the 14th Amendment was violated because he was denied admission based on his race. And so this became known as, reverse discrimination. And the rule, nope, it's happening. Sorry, guys. That's the last time I'll say sorry. There it is. Bakke. So the ruling in this case was that mandatory racial quotas are unconstitutional, but it didn't necessarily ban affirmative action. Like, race still could be used as a consideration for admissions. It just got a little murkier there. So that is everything you need to know for Unit 3. Let's get some of this tea in me, and I'm going to read some super chats here. You guys feeling good? Yeah. Oh, stop. Okay. Okay. All right, so this is coming from, I don't know what time this is from. It's toward the beginning. Hi, Goat Heimler. Can you pretty please give a shout out? Allison Sigma 67. Hi, Goat Heimler. Can you pretty please give a shout out to Mr. Altman, the Aura Sigma Maxing Mager Gov teacher in the Kernel Dome? Okay. Then Image Hitasoli. Shout out to Mr. Michael Tyler from Basis Independent Bellevue for making sure we're not cooked for AP Gov and for introducing us to Heimler. Aw, good to see you guys. Reese Ironi. Shout out to Mod 4 through 6, AP Gov taught by the best, Mr. Markham. Signed, Reese, Chloe, Addie Y, Sarah, Elena, Addie P, Eliza, Kristen, Lexi, Megan, Melanie. Aw. Addison. Shout out the GOAT, Miss Adamo and Addison. Hey, guys. SR Deuce. One more shout out to the Rizless, Oralist Ottoman Empire for a generational fumble against an island nation 2,100 miles away. Indeed. Let us raise our cups. All right. Anthon XYZ. Thank you so much for the reviews, Heimler. This is why you're the GOAT. Oh, thanks. Can we get a second shout out for our class's amazing AP Gov teacher, Mr. Mack, for ensuring that we succeeded and win the game of AP? Mr. Mack, you are well loved. All right, one more, and then we'll get back to the review. This is from Sided Manager, and this is from 7:02 p.m., by the way. Shout out to the Kilowatt Watkins for making every class exciting, and thank you, Heimler, for carrying me in AP World, A Push, and now in AP Gov. Man, you've been around for a long time. I appreciate that. All right. I say we keep partying. Get on to Unit 4. Unit 4. Will the voice hold? We'll see. We'll see. Aw. You are beautiful, Heimler. Well, thank you. All right. Big idea number 1. By the way, if you don't have the notes, you can follow along with this. I've got notes down below that you can download and follow along with. Maybe it'll help. I don't know. Maybe it won't. But they're there for you if you want them. Unit 4, big idea. Americans' relationship to core American beliefs, which are shared by nearly every American, affects how they think about the role of government. Okay. So there are basically 5, this is a massive generalization, but there are basically 5 sort of American values that Americans of all stripes tend to agree on. Number 1 is individualism. Number 2 is equality of opportunity. Number 3, free enterprise. Number 4, the rule of law. And number 5, limited government. So, all Americans basically agree on these fundamentals in principle, but depending on each citizen's political ideology, those 5 ideas are interpreted differently. So when I say political ideology, that comes along a scale, and that scale is basically from liberal to conservative, okay? And if you're a liberal or somewhere along the scale on that side, you're going to interpret these ideas differently. But if you're a conservative, you're going to interpret these ideas differently. Well, like conservatives and liberals are going to look at individualism and say, yeah, we can all agree on that. That's great. But what they mean by individualism, a whole different thing. For example, a conservative looks at individualism as, this is the technical term for it. I'm not like throwing shade. This is just the technical term for it. It's called self-centered individualism, which, emphasizes the interest of individuals above the interests of society. Okay. But liberals look at individualism. They interpreted it. It's almost not fair because the way liberals interpret individualism is called enlightened individualism. Again, not my term. It's just it is what it is. But basically, that emphasizes the opposite. Basically, emphasizing the interests of the group above the interests of the individual. And then another example, liberals and conservatives are going to look at equality of opportunity and say, yeah, that's something we all value. Very absolutely. But a conservative will look at it and say, when it comes to equality of opportunity, individual sweat is going to lead to success. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. If you work hard enough and you're not lazy, you're going to get everything you want. Okay. Liberals will look at equality, the value of equality of opportunity and say, look, not everybody starts on the same, equal footing. And, some government intervention may be necessary to support those people's advancement because they were not granted the same privileges that these other groups were. Okay. So those are just 2 examples. So you need to be able to apply that same kind of reasoning to the beliefs of free enterprise, the rule of law, limited government, etc. But for now, we're going to move on to big idea number 2. Cultural factors influence political attitudes and socialization. Okay, so different factors influence how people think about politics. Okay, and that's what we call political socialization. Okay, how does a person develop and come to hold their particular political beliefs? For most people, it's not because they went away into, a library for 5 years and studied everything they could possibly read and came to conclusions and all the research and everything. It's like, and that's fine, because who has time for that? You can't do that. But there's so many other factors that go into how you hold political beliefs. And the most important of those factors include family, school, your peers, the media, social environments like religious institutions, for example. And so those things affect how people think politically. And then another factor that affects political socialization is the phenomenon of globalization. So this is especially, since this is accelerated since after World War II, but globalization is basically referring to the increasing interconnectedness of the world. And so now we're getting more information from so many different cultures, so many different places, and that's going to affect how we think politically. There's also other things that affect political beliefs are generational and life cycle effects. So generational effects, basically, there are some common themes among the different generations as to how they think politically. So, in the generations you should probably have a good handle on are the silent generation, which are sort of the coming of age in the World War II era, the baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z. Okay. Now, within each of those generations, people have, common shared experiences, and all those things influence how they think politically. For example, in Generation X / millennials, like younger X, older millennials, they all, one of the big defining events for them was the September 11th attacks. And so that, in general, again, these are all generalizations. There's so many exceptions, but in general, millennials tend to think to favor cooperation for international policy because of that. Now, with the silent generation, these are today's senior citizens. They grew up in the Great Depression. They grew up in World War II. They have a high value on religious belief and church participation, and so they were not fans at all of all this cultural upheaval that occurred in the 1960s and 70s with, racial integration and women's rights and all the rest. And so that means this generation in general is more conservative. Okay. Millennials. Did we already talk about millennials? I can't remember. Okay. Well, let me say something real quick. So millennials, did I talk about X before? I don't know. So millennials, they tend to be more liberal than the previous generations. They're much more favorable to, previous generations like the boomers and the silent generation were much more favorable to the use of force in foreign policy. But millennials tend to value cooperation and diplomacy. So those are the generational effects of political socialization. There are also life cycle effects. And this is where, like where a person is in their life cycle, like teenager, young adult, middle-aged, senior citizen, whatever, where a person is along that spectrum, that affects how they think about politics and policy. Okay. So for example, this is like you understand this. Like if you're 18, you're watching this and you can vote, you probably don't have the same concerns as, retired Americans and what they are wanting to vote for and the policies that they want. That's fine. That's how it should be. Because like voters in college, they tend to prefer candidates who can help them with education issues, like especially student loans and that sort of thing. But senior citizens, they want candidates who are going to uphold their interests, like Social Security, et cetera. So depending on where you are in your life, that can affect your political socialization. And that's going to lead us to big idea number 3. Actually, hold on just one sec. Talk amongst yourselves. All right. Here we go. Big idea. What are we on? 3? All right, good. Big idea number 3. Public opinion is measured through scientific polling, and the results of public opinion polls influence public policies and institutions. Okay, so you're going to need to know 5 types of polls that are used to measure public opinion. The first is an opinion poll. Okay, an opinion poll is just getting a feel for the public's opinion, or their opinion or their feelings about a certain candidate or a certain policy. That's all it is. It is what it sounds like. The second kind you need to know is a benchmark poll. This is a poll that's taken at the beginning of a candidate's run on a certain issue or what people think of the candidate. And then that gives the campaign, like a benchmark, as it's called, against which they can compare future polls to see how they're doing. The third kind of poll you need to know is a tracking poll. These are polls that are conducted over time and, usually with the same group of people. And that gives information on how the group feels about a given issue as the campaign progresses. The fourth kind of poll that you need to know is an entrance poll. These are polls that are conducted before people enter their polling location in order to vote. And basically they're just asking, hey, how are you going to vote? And then the pollster marks it down. And then the fifth type is the opposite. And that is exit polls. Those are conducted right after voters leave their polling location, and they ask, how did those people vote? Now, public opinion polling, so much we can say about it. But the thing I want to emphasize here is I want to figure out, okay, how do these pollsters ensure that their measurements are legitimate, right? They don't just go out on the street and ask people what, they have to have certain techniques. Okay. One of those techniques is sampling. Okay. They have to have, in order for polling data to be accurate, they need to pull from a representative sample. So a representative sample is basically a small portion of the larger population that has the same characteristics of that larger population. And with that smaller part, they can then, extrapolate and generalize to the larger population. Also, the sample has to be random. They have to have a random sample. So this means that every member of the population has to have an equal chance for being selected in order to participate in these polls. But even if it's a lovely random sample and it's a representative sample, even if they've done all their work, there's always going to be some degree of error in polling numbers. Okay? Like every poll, no matter how rigorously it was composed, it always has the possibility for error in it. And that's because you're not actually asking every single person in the population. You're asking a representative group, and there's always going to be some wiggle room there. And that leads us to big idea number 4. There is a discernible relationship between scientific polling and elections and policy debates. All right. So sticking with public polling for a minute, candidates who are running for office, representatives who are running for office, or representatives who are already in office, they decide how to run their campaign or how to pass legislation based on public opinion data. Okay. Also, on the other side, voters decide who they're going to vote for as a result of polling. Okay. So this relationship between, polling and elections and policy debates is affected by a couple of things. Number one, the reliability of public opinion data. Like how does the public perceive, how good is this data in the public's mind? And recently there's been some significant, really major polling failures that have, called into question the reliability of polling as an entire exercise. So, for example, the 2016 presidential election, which was a contest between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. This is, the first Trump run. And, polls had Hillary Clinton winning by a large margin. And, she did win the popular vote, but it was Trump who won the Electoral College vote. And so everybody's looking at this polling data saying, how did they get it so wrong? So that has that affects the way people think about how pollsters do their job. Also, non-scientific polls affect reliability. So, you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be like a professional pollster to put a poll out there and see what people think. Like polls can be funded by political parties. They can be funded by certain partisan news outlets. And, they do this in order to demonstrate they bias their results in order to demonstrate support for partisan policies and, for the candidates that, I gotta stop hitting this, for the candidates that they want to see elected. And so ultimately this is a lot of, smoke and mirrors. It's not reliable, but it does affect the way people think. They see this, it's a very partisan, well-funded poll, and it seems very biased. And that has a way of, it can affect the way people think about actual real scientific polling. Okay. That leads us to big idea number 5. Big idea number 5. Political ideology is an interlocking set of ideas that forms the basis for political decision making. Okay. Let's get into ideology. So, as I mentioned before, political ideologies fall along a spectrum between conservative and liberal. And if you don't know, when something is referred to as right wing, that's conservative. Liberal or left wing, that's liberal. Okay. Just think left wing starts with L, liberal. I don't know if you're struggling with that. There it is. Now, most Americans in general would consider themselves moderate. Okay. The majority of Americans, let's just say majority, not most, majority of Americans, they don't think of themselves as extremely conservative or extremely liberal on either side. Most Americans consider themselves moderate because we like to think of ourselves as thinking people who don't just fall in line with what everybody else is saying, right? But I will say over time, in the last 25, 30 years, conservatives have gotten more conservative and liberals have gotten more liberal. And I should back up and just let's talk about what these ideologies are. So liberalism is basically liberals are open to allowing the government to expand in order to provide services for the public good. Okay. So liberals are much more open to that, right? They're much more open to government intervention for the sake of public flourishing. Conservatives, on the other hand, they emphasize tradition. They emphasize establishment, okay? And they are much more closed to government intervention in the lives of Americans. So liberals would say, conservatives would say, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Whereas liberals would look at society and say, well, it is broke, so the government has to fix it, okay? Now, there are two major parties that basically align with these ideologies. There's the Democrats, and they align with liberal ideology. And, their platform, which is, basically the statement of what the party believes and what the kind of policies that the party will work for if they get elected. Their platform includes a whole lot of things like protecting a woman's right to abortion, equal rights for women, equal rights for LGBTQ+, health care for the poor, et cetera, et cetera. Republicans, on the other hand, align with conservative ideology. And so on their platform, they want low taxes. They want, an America first trade policy. They want anti-regulation of business, which on the flip side would mean they are pro-business. Okay. And we're going to keep talking about that. So let's go to the next big idea, the last one of Unit 4, and we'll get to some more of these super chats. Okay. Big idea number 6. Public policy only reflects the attitudes and beliefs of those who actually participate in the political process. Okay, real quickly. So each ideology has a different view of how the government should be involved in the nation's economy. Liberals, they favor more government intervention in the economy. And the reason why is because they want to protect the public good from, unregulated businesses. Liberal economic ideology is, to some degree, a large degree, based on what's known as Keynesian economics, okay? And this addresses fiscal policy, which is, like government taxation and spending. And to make it entirely too simple, Keynesian economics is all about government spending. It creates demand by putting a big spender in there, and that big spender is Big Daddy government. You know what I'm talking about? Conservatives, on the other hand, they favor less government involvement in the economy, and because, and according to their own principles, they want to uphold the principles of the free market and get the government out. Whereas liberal economic policy is based on Keynesian economics, conservative conservative economic policies are based on what's known as supply-side economics. So this also addresses fiscal policy, and it emphasizes that the forces of supply and demand, that these are important for the government to stay out of, because if the government gets involved in these forces, then ultimately you are restricting people's liberty. They say ultimately that no matter what, the market is always going to correct itself when it comes to economic downturns or depressions or whatever. And so if you just wait long enough, it'll correct itself. The point is, liberals are much more open to having government involvement in the economic decisions. Conservatives, not so much. Okay. And let's just throw libertarian in there for funsies. I mean, not for funsies. It is in the curriculum. You should know it. Libertarians, basically, they favor almost no government involvement in the economy. All they really want is for the government to protect property rights and protect their ability to, trade voluntarily. All right. So I talked about fiscal policy a second ago. Let's talk about monetary policy. This addresses how much currency is in circulation in the national economy. So the Federal Reserve is responsible for managing monetary policy, and it does so by buying and selling government bonds, setting government requirements at banks, reserve requirements, which basically is how much money does the bank have to keep in their vaults. And they also manage the money supply through setting interest rates. And that can be, even though the Fed is an independent entity, it definitely feels political pressure from the various ideologies. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's it for Unit 4. So let's do some super chats. All right. How you feeling good? How you feeling good? Good Lord. I am loopy. Yes, AP Econ indeed. Trickle-down economics is basically supply-side economics, by the way. Yes, I will go over campaign finance. But that's in Unit 5. All right, let me do a few of these super chats, and then we'll move on to Unit 5. Get yourself some candy or something. All right, I am reading from 7:02 p.m. German Lucas, shout out to Mr. Soto. He is always playing your videos. Well, thank you, Mr. Soto. The Noings Music. Shout out to Miss Harrington, the undisputed queen of AP Gov at Doherty Valley High. Thanks for everything, Miss Harrington. Aw, that's sweet. Justin Milrad, shout out to Kayla and Reese from Galloway School. Howdy. Amy 2. Shout out to Megan L in Mr. Leong's class. AR Carp. Shout out to Larry Vondercheck. Best history teacher in the world, and the only one who can make 8 a.m. A-Push actually fun. I love that name, Vondercheck. Man, what a name. That is amazing. I just want to say it, Vondercheck. Wish my name was Vondercheck. Okay. Prank Hub. Mr. Welch, don't worry. Mark is getting a 5. Also, Heimler, thanks. He thinks you stole his job. Comments. Also, please shout out to Mark Lubchin. I didn't mean to steal anybody's job. If I did, I shall give it right back. Love you anyway. All right, Jason Nueda. Hi, can you shout out Miss Nakamura's second period AP Gov class and bless us to all get a 5 on the AP test. Consider yourself blessed. Lizzie Rose, let me do a couple more here. Izzy Rose. No comment, but thank you. FARUK. What are your FRQ predictions? Thank you. Shout out to Miss Dalal. I wish I could give you some FRQ predictions. There are teachers out there who are like putting in spreadsheets and trying to solve the mystery, and they haven't asked for this in 7 years, and so I don't know, man. My brain doesn't work that way. I wish. I'll tell you what. For sure, I could tell you one thing for sure about the FRQ. Everybody listening? Everybody listening? It will not, if you're asking about the, argumentative essay, for example, it's not going to be the prompt that they gave you last year. That's all I can say for sure. All I can say for sure. Okay. A couple more here. SCT Woven. Shout out to the GOAT, Miss Alonzo, for hosting the barbecue. Okay. Pixel 42. Shout out Miss Blackwell at WECIB. We're all getting 5s on this exam. Yes, you are. The Noings Music. This is to the DVHS Writing Guild and all our AP World, Euro, APUSH, and Gov students. We are getting 5s on all our exams. You got this. Good luck. Yes. I love it. You guys are getting it. I feel it. Y'all getting 5s. Ramen Boy GD. Shout out to James Madison. I respect that. Courtney, last one. Courtney Golder. Shout out to the Washington Park AP Gov crew. You all worked so hard. You've got this. Aw, love it. All right. I'll start reading from 7:06 p.m. When we come back. But we do have yet one more unit to go through. So I reckon we ought to get this party started. Y'all ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Unit 5. Political participation. Big idea number 1. The Constitution protects voting rights, and the diversity of people eligible to vote has expanded over time. Okay, so over time, the right to vote, which the word for that is franchise, so don't get confused if you see that, the right to vote over time has been expanded to more and more and more people. In the beginning of the Republic, the right to vote was basically restricted to white men who owned land, okay? Then in 1830, just do a real quick run through history here. Then in 1830, you get universal white male suffrage. Basically, that just removed the property requirements. So then, all you had to be was white and a man, and you could vote. You didn't have to have any property. Then, through a series of constitutional amendments, the franchise was basically expanded to all Americans. So the 15th Amendment extended the franchise to black men. The 17th Amendment opened the voting of senators to the people. The 19th Amendment recognized the right of women to vote. The 23rd Amendment opened voting in D.C., Washington, D.C. The 24th Amendment abolished poll taxes. The 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18, and that was in response to the Vietnam War. And that was a lot of amendments I just threw at you. The point is, over time, it was in the beginning of the Republic, the amount of people who could vote was very, very small. Over time, it is expanded more and more and more so that more Americans can vote. Now, there's only a very small percentage, very small part of an American citizenry who cannot vote. I guess that's all I have to say about that. Now, when people vote, there are 4 models that you need to know that explain how it is, when somebody goes into the voting booth, what are they thinking? How are they understanding themselves as they're going into the voting booth, and how are they going to, what framework, what mental framework are they bringing to the task of voting? There's 4 of these models. Number 1, rational choice voting. Here, a person just votes based on their individual self-interest. The rational piece is this is someone who has, carefully studied the issues and carefully studied the platforms, and they go in well-informed and they vote based on their own research. The second model for voting is retrospective voting. This is when a person votes based on the track record of the politician in question. They basically look at this person and ask a very basic question. Was this candidate a turd? Or was this candidate not a turd? If not, I'll go ahead and vote for him again. Okay? That's retrospective voting. Then the opposite is prospective voting. Here, a person votes based on the potential future the candidate can bring, based on campaign promises, etc., that align with that voter's ideology. And then fourthly, there's something called straight ticket voting. This is the easiest one. You basically just vote for all the candidates of your party. Okay, so like if you're a Republican, you go into the voting booth. Look, this side, everybody's Republican. Tick, 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 tick. It's over. Okay, that's all you have to do. Very easy, no thinking involved. And that leads us to big idea number 2. I didn't mean that to be like an insult, like no thinking involved. What I mean is like it's just simple. You know your loyalty and you just do it. I'm gonna move on. I love you guys. Okay. Big idea number 2. Several factors determine voter turnout in any given election. Okay. So when it comes to the ability of people to get out and vote, there are there's something called we're trying to figure out how easy is it for people to vote. Well, sometimes there are things called structural barriers. For example, some states require government-issued photo ID in order to vote, and that is an example of a structural barrier. Whether it's a good idea or not what I'm saying. But it is, a hoop that you have to jump through. And that affects, those kinds of policies affect how easy it is for people to vote. There's also the issue of political efficacy, which is a citizen's sense of whether or not their vote can actually make a difference. Okay. So for example, a conservative, a Republican who lives in New York, which, is a deeply blue state, deeply democratic state, might feel like, his or her vote doesn't count for anything. Like, yeah, I could go vote for the Republican candidate, but I live in New York. It's not going to happen. Okay, so that's the idea of political efficacy. How powerful do I feel like I actually am? How much of a difference do I think this vote can actually make? If I feel like my political efficacy is high, I'm going to go out and I'm going to vote. If I feel like it doesn't matter if I vote or not, low political efficacy, I might just stay home. Okay. Also, the type of election affects how people vote. So presidential elections, they tend to have the highest voter turnout. Congressional elections, they're much lower. And then, as you go down to the local level, state level, county, local, municipal, those turnouts tend to be much lower percentage-wise than the presidential election. So the type of election also affects how people get out and vote. Also, demographics are a powerful tool in predicting how people are going to vote. So, for example, gender. And again, we're talking about generalizations here. These are, this is data. Women tend to vote for Democrats in higher numbers than Republicans. Men tend to be the opposite. Okay, so demographics, gender plays a role in how people vote. Age also plays a role in how people vote. So, the youngest eligible voters turn out in the smallest numbers. Okay, so people who just turned 18 and they get a chance to vote, they tend to be the smallest represented in any given election. But they also tend to lean Democrat. The oldest voters tend to be the most represented, and they tend to lean Republican. And so even if those two ends of the age spectrum are equal in terms of numbers of people, the fact that older voters vote more often than younger voters means that it's going to skew towards the older voters' ideology. Okay? All right, big idea number 3. Big idea number 3. All right. Linkage institutions. I'm just going to go ahead and say I have the worst time saying the word linkage. I feel like it sounds like I'm drunk when I say it. Linkage institution. I'm going to have to say it a lot here in the next couple of big ideas. So there it is. Okay. Linkage is now I can't do it. Linkage institutions are just, the other one for me is judicial. I sound drunk when I say that. Judicial. That's a hard one to say. I don't know why. Okay. Linkage institutions are social structures that connect people to their government or the political process and allow individuals to communicate their preferences to policymakers. Okay, so let's talk about the big 4 linkage institutions that you need to know. Number 1, political parties. Number 2, interest groups. Number 3, elections. Number 4, media. Okay? In the next big idea, we're going to talk about all 4. But now let me just talk about political parties for a second. So What is a political party and what do they do? Well, by definition, a political party is an organization that sort of forms around ideological beliefs, and their main goal is to put forward candidates for election. Well, the main goal is to get those candidates elected, but they always put forward a candidate for an election. And what parties do very well is to mobilize voters and educate voters on the platforms of their particular parties, which is the next point, that parties actually create platforms and that outline the policies that they're going to the policies that they hope to pass if their candidate was elected. So, as you should probably know by now, Republican platforms, the platform of the Republican Party is going to align mainly with conservative ideology. So like low taxes, national security, minimal government intervention. The platform of the Democratic Party is going to align mainly with liberal ideology. So there's going to be emphases on minority rights and public welfare, government intervention in order to make sure that society is flourishing, etc. So that's what parties do. Parties also manage campaigns for their candidates. Their main goal is to get their candidate elected by hosting fundraisers, implementing targeted media strategies that's going to appeal to the most voters. And, a candidate could do this on their own, but parties are well organized with help in order to do this. Now, there's also a phenomenon with political parties that's known as party realignment. Okay, this is when large groups of voters move from one party to another, and that can happen. It doesn't happen often, but that can happen if a party is badly defeated in an election, because it's like, okay, clearly. The parties look at themselves and say, clearly, we're not as effective in voters' eyes as we thought we would be. For a big example of this was when the Democrat Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected, beat the Republican Herbert Hoover by an absolute landslide in 1932, and then FDR won an even bigger landslide in 1936 when he beat Alf Landon by an even greater margin. And so at that point, a lot of the more centrist members of some major coalitions of the traditional Republican Party began to move over into the Democratic Party, and the Republicans had to have a reckoning with who they are, what they believe, how they want to get candidates elected from then on. All right, you guys were asking about campaign finance. It's now time, okay? So campaign finance laws have also affected the way parties interact or the way they do their jobs. So since the 1970s, campaign finance laws and Supreme Court decisions have very much changed how much money can be lawfully given to candidates and to parties. We'll talk more about that in a moment, ad nauseum. Also, what has affected parties is changes in communication and data management technology. So parties now rely on psychographics in order to understand very deep understandings of who voters are and what they care about, and they use that information to refine their candidate's look. Like, that guy should not be wearing a coat; he should just be wearing a T-shirt, or he should have a beard or not a beard, like those kinds of things. Those are just image things, but the psychographics are applied to all kinds of messaging for the candidates. It's pretty wild, and that leads us to a big idea number 4. Where's my mouse? There we go. Big idea number 4. The U.S. operates as a two-party system, and that makes it very difficult for third parties and independent parties to ever win an election. Okay, now there's 2 reasons. Go through this quickly. Why can't third parties ever win an election? I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, they theoretically could, but it's very difficult. Why? 2 reasons. Number 1, winner-take-all voting districts. Okay, in the Electoral College system, which is what was laid out by the Constitution, whichever candidate wins the most popular votes is awarded all of the electoral votes of that state. Okay, so it's a winner take all, and there's 2 exceptions to this. There's Nebraska and there's Maine. They split their electoral votes, but for every other state, it's a winner take all system. And so, since the 2 major parties, they're the biggest parties, they appeal to the largest amount of voters. And so that makes it almost impossible for a third-party candidate to receive any electoral votes, since they never even, muster close to the majority of, popular votes in any given state. The second reason it's hard for third parties to get elected is because of the incorporation of third party agendas into the platforms of the major parties. Now, third parties often are much more narrow in what they in their agenda and what they support. Like often third parties are emphasizing certain policies like environmentalism, etc. And so, if there's a significant contingent of Americans that support the agenda of that third party, then all one of the major parties needs to do, the Republicans or the Democrats, all they got to do is, make a strategic move and incorporate those items into their own platform, thus nullifying the need for the third party. And so, third parties, they got it rough out there. And those are two big reasons why. And that leads us to big idea number 5. Interest groups are a linkage institution that mostly form around single issues or a certain demographic in order to influence policymaking. All right. So the goal of interest groups is to persuade policymakers to pass legislation, and specifically to pass legislation that aligns with that group's interests. And one of the chief ways that they do that is through the activity of lobbying. So, because many of these interest groups form around a single issue, those lobbyists are often policy experts, right? They can help policymakers understand the impact of certain legislation. They can educate congressional representatives and help them pass it. That's the best possible interpretation of lobbying. But also remember what I mentioned last night, that interest groups are one point on the iron triangle, right? You've got agencies, congressional committees, and interest groups, and all of them work together in order to get policy passed and, make sure each other are informed and that sort of thing. And these relationships can be very mutually beneficial. Again, that's the most positive interpretation of iron triangles because they're good. They can be very good. Just like anything, they can also go bad, but they can be very good. So basically the way the iron triangle works is members of congressional committees, they are helped by interest groups who provide policy information, like because they're experts. Also, those interest groups will provide campaign donations if the representative seems to be sympathetic to the group's goals. And then around and around that relationship goes. Now, the level of influence that interest groups are able to exert depends on a few factors. Number one, funding. In general, groups with better funding have much, much more power. Okay, just for example, the NRA, the National Rifle Association. They got lots of money. They got lots of power. Then there's the other thing that affects it is the free rider problem. So when a larger group of Americans benefits from the efforts of the interest group, then it's like, the interest group is doing all the funding, doing all the lobbying, doing everything that they do in order to get this particular policy passed, which is going to affect lots of people in America. That's what's known as free riders, right? The people who benefit from it are not necessarily part of the interest group themselves. They're not paying the bills, but their proposed legislation is going to help a lot more people than those in the group. And that's going to lead us to big idea number 6. Big idea number 6. All right. The president is elected through a series of steps and ultimately through the Electoral College. Tasty. All right. Electoral College. All right, let's talk about presidential elections. So, electing the president is about the most complex electoral process that we have in the United States. So first, let's talk about how it's done. Step 1, the candidate has got to win a state primary election or caucus, depending on the state, in order to earn that party's nomination. And there are, I'm sad to say, a couple different types of primaries that you need to know. Number 1 is a closed primary. In a closed primary, voters have to vote for the candidate that aligns with the voters' declared party. So if you are a registered Republican, you have to vote for the Republican candidate in a closed primary, okay? In an open primary, voters can vote for any party's candidate that they want, okay? Now, I mentioned the word caucus. Some states do use caucuses instead of primaries. I'm not going to get into let's not complicate things right now on, 2 nights before the exam. The chief difference between a primary and a caucus is that voting happens, in a caucus, voting happens at the state level by secret ballot. In a primary happens by secret ballot. Caucuses happen at a more local level, and the voting is a lot more visible. Okay. The end result is the same. It's just a, different process. Okay, so after the candidate wins the primary, then comes the general election. So, candidates travel around the country, they give speeches, they refine their positions, they're, participating in televised debates, et cetera, et cetera. And there's something that's known in the general election, there's something that's known as the incumbency advantage, which means, the incumbent is the president that's currently sitting, that's currently in office. The sitting president is much more likely to get reelected than the challenging candidate. And as we're going to see, that's much more true in congressional races. But the point is, the incumbent, it's like, everybody knows that person can be the president. They know the good, they know the bad, they know it all. So there's an advantage to that, all right? Then once the general election is finished, the vote goes to the Electoral College. So remember, the president is not elected by the people's votes, but instead by a small number of electors from each state. So each state has the same number of electors as they have members in Congress. Okay, so for example, Georgia has 16 electors, right? That's because there are 14 Georgia representatives in the House, and there are 2 senators. Okay, so that means Georgia has 16 electors when it comes to a presidential election. Now, electors almost always vote in line with the public vote, okay, but not always. Some states have laws, but the point is, there are some occasions where electors vote against what the popular vote was. They are known as faithless electors. Anyway, so once the Electoral College has, or as the Electoral College is doing their thing, remember, this is a winner-take-all system. So whichever candidate wins the plurality of the popular vote, they win all of that state's electoral votes. And again, Maine and Nebraska are the exceptions. They split their electoral votes. But everywhere else, that's how it goes. And then once that's over, we got ourselves a new president. All right. That leads us to big idea number 7. Congressional elections have less participation than presidential elections, and there are several factors which determine who gets elected to Congress. So let's talk about it. So congressional elections, let's start with the House. House seats, like all House seats, are up for election every 2 years. And then 1/3 of Senate seats are up every 2 years. So remember, I don't even know if I mentioned this yesterday, House representatives representative's term in the House is 2 years. A senator's term is 6 years. And senators get reelected every 6 years, but they're staggered so that a third of them get elected every 2 years on 1 year, then another third, and you get the point. Maybe I said that last time. I can't remember. Anyway, so congressional elections, yeah. So midterm elections happen halfway through the presidential term. That's what's actually going to happen here in November. We're going to have midterm elections. And I mentioned the incumbent advantage before with the president. Again, it's much greater in congressional elections. And that's because, the congressional elections are less people vote for these people, less voters vote for these candidates. And so the incumbent has a lot of advantages. Number one, name recognition. Okay. Some people, I mean, who knows how many Americans don't even know the names of their representatives, but if they're going to know any name, that is an advantage, that they have some name recognition because they've already been in office. These incumbents also have a network of financial donors, and money is a big deal in elections. We'll talk about that. But also, gerrymandered districts can be a problem for contenders seeking office as well. So, not to get too far into the weeds here, the majority party draws the congressional districts, and they will always draw them to their own advantage, right? And this is not illegal. This is how it goes. We talked last night about how when it gets illegal, it's because these districts are drawn based on race or some other qualification. But because the majority party draws these districts, they draw them to their own advantage, and it becomes very difficult for them to be unseated. Okay, that's why it's hard for that's the incumbency advantage is very, very real. And that leads us to big idea number 8. Y'all still with me? Y'all still with me? We got after this 2 more big ideas, so 3 total. 3 total. All right. I'm seeing yes. Good. Let's keep going. Running a campaign for office is a complex and exceedingly complicated process, and campaign organizations and strategies affect the election process. All right, y'all are cooking now. All right. Giving me some energy. Okay. Campaigns. Okay, so one of the most important things for campaigns that often makes or breaks who wins is fundraising. Okay, it's rare for a candidate to finance their own campaign, but instead they rely on party funding and individual donors and organizations like political action committees or PACs or super PACs. There's so many different kinds of ways that money can be filtered. So over time, political campaigns have gotten much longer. And that means they've gotten much more expensive. Like, I mean, in a whole lot of countries, it's not unusual for campaign seasons to run 10 weeks or less. And that's because they have laws mandating it. But there are no such laws in the United States. And so, with states competing for earlier and earlier primaries, because the ones who go first often get a bump in tourism dollars, the election season has gotten longer and longer over time, and that means it is more and more expensive over time, and that leads us very nicely into big idea number 9. Money is at the heart of political campaigns. I wish I could tell you it was ideology. I wish I could tell you it was rational choice voting, but money is at the heart of political campaigns. But there are laws that govern such financial contributions, and that has led to the debate about the proper role of money in politics. So for this, let me just go ahead and introduce you to the Federal Election Commission, the FEC. This was an entity that was created by Congress in 1974. Now, the law which created the FEC also stipulated that individuals could not donate more than $1,000 to a candidate, and a political action committee could not donate more than $5,000 for a candidate, and this is both per election. Now, there was a ruling in a case called Buckley v. Vallejo. This is not a required case. In 1965, it challenges this law because the argument was you can't restrict how much money we give to political candidates, because at the end of the day, if I'm giving money to a political candidate, that's essentially my speech, right? I am endorsing this candidate. And so Buckley v. Vallejo comes in against this law and says, you can't restrict, money is essentially speech, so you can't restrict the amount of money that's being given. The court upheld the law, and basically, they came into agreement that without limits upon campaign donations, fair elections were impossible, right? Because if money is speech, then those with the most money naturally have the most speech. They can speak the loudest, and those with the least money can speak the least. And that to the justices, that did not seem like a fair system. And so they kept this restriction. But people with money found a way around that restriction. And here's where I introduce you to 2 different kinds of money. There's hard money and there's soft money. Hard money is money that's donated directly to a candidate's campaign. That money is subject to campaign finance laws. Those amounts that I just mentioned. But then there's soft money. This is money that's donated to a party or an interest group who not directly to the candidate, who could then buy advertising or whatever on a candidate's behalf. And if you do it sort of the roundabout way like that, then that money was not subject to the regulations. That was not subject to the law. So the solution came in 2002. It was the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, or BICRA. This law increased the limits of hard money donations, but it also sought to curtail the spending of soft money. And one regulation that they enacted through this law was the stand by your ad provision of the law. So in any political advertising, the candidate is required by law to say, I'm Steve Heimler and I approve this message, or, whatever the name is, to show that all the finances are above board. Now, the big case, required case on campaign finance is Citizens United v. the Federal Election Commission. That came in 2010. This argued that the BICRA, the law that I just mentioned, that those limitations amounted to, again, a violation of free speech. So, like, if a corporation or other entity wants to spend money to endorse a candidate, they argued they should be able to do so in unlimited measure because of the principle of freedom of speech. Now, the court in this case ruled that restricting campaign donations was a violation of free speech. Therefore, the corporate funding of ads as a result of this decision, Citizens United, the corporate funding of ads and broadcasts cannot be limited by law. Okay. So ultimately, the thing that people often mention about this case is that it established the precedent that corporations are people and they cannot have their free speech curtailed. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen, the last big idea of the night. Big idea number 10. The media is a linkage institution. Of course, it had to have linkage in it. The media is a linkage institution. It's also known as a watchdog agency, which holds the government responsible to its citizens. All right. So the media play a big role in political agenda setting, and that's through several different means, and that's changed over the course of history. When it comes to the traditional news media, in the beginning of the Republic, it was political messaging occurred through newspapers. Then over time, we got radio in the first half of the 20th century, and radio was used to broadcast political debates. Franklin Delano Roosevelt used the radio to great effect to talk to Americans about what was going on in his New Deal programs addressing the Great Depression. And we talked about that last night, so I'll move past that. Then a couple decades later, television became one of the main communication tools for political messaging. And television was an interesting one, especially as it sort of came of age. It was a technology that came of age during the Vietnam War. And so these television news reports are coming out of Vietnam that are profoundly contradicting what the president and his officials are saying about what's actually going on in the war. Like, people can see it with their eyes on the television. President's saying, yeah, it's so great. Everything's going real well over there. We're almost there. Just a little more escalation and we got it. And so that led to a profound trust gap in the presidency and in the federal government. But the different ways in which, the media do their job, okay? One is investigative reporting. This has been around for a long time. The heyday of it was typically thought of during the Progressive era, the first maybe 20 years of the 20th century. A good example here is Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which provided a very in-depth investigation on the profoundly unsanitary conditions in meatpacking plants, which I won't go into. But, investigative journalism, one of the things that it does is it exposes certain scandals to the reading public, to the American public. And as a result of Upton Sinclair publishing The Jungle, several very important pieces of legislation were passed, like the Meat Inspection Act, I'm forgetting the other one off the top of my head. But the point is, the way the media covered these scandals led to reform. Okay, so the media, it's very important what they do. But with the rise of social media, that's become, the traditional news media is sort of very centralized. Social media, on the other hand, is a lot more decentralized. And social media is unhinged from the traditional outlets, although, traditional outlets do use social media to, establish their presence on sites like Facebook and X, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the media is also known as a gatekeeping entity, okay? Or the way, one of the features of the way they do their work is gatekeeping. The idea here is that, look, there's in a single day, like, so much happens, around the world, even in our own country, even in our own neighborhood. There's only so much you can fit into, any media outlet. And so, the issues that these newspapers or these news organizations choose to feature, that actually can shape the nature of the conversation, right? And this can especially affect elections because, the media tend to hyper focus on the races and the minutia of the races, how each candidate is doing. And that has a way of influencing how people perceive these candidates. And then the last thing I'm going to say is that media has changed in the most recent past. And what I mean is, media ownership, who owns these media companies, that affects how the news is reported. So, for example, cable news networks, these are a relatively new phenomenon, 20, 25 years or so. Cable news networks who put news on 24 hours a day, they are for-profit companies, which means that they have incentives to report on what gets the most engagement, what gets the most eyeballs. And as partisanship in the news media has increased over time, cable news networks have altered their programming to fit with their audience. So, for example, CNN typically appeals more to liberals. Fox News typically appeals more to conservatives, and the more they lean into those particular ideologies, the less there's going to be any common ground between them. Additionally, when people gravitate towards these outlets, one or the other, they find themselves in an echo chamber of information. Like they're only being fed what confirms the already existing beliefs, and that can be a problem. So, with that, that's everything. That's everything. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. I'm good. I'm good. Love you guys. Okay, so I'm going to finish up these super chats now. But if you're going to leave, just so you know, this is the last stream for this particular subject, and I'm just glad we got to do it together this year. I love you guys, and you make me awfully happy for allowing me to be part of your education, part of what you're doing in the world, and I love it. I love it. So thank you. And good luck on that exam. I'm going to be cheering you on. I'm going to be over here just thinking about you. And no matter what happens, at the end of it, I'm proud of you. Just so you know, I'm proud of you. You did a hard thing, and I love that about you. So, all right. So if you're going to log off now, that's great. Glad you're around. But we got a whole stack of super chats over here that we need to get going. Let me get organized here. There we go. All right. Let's see. Love you guys too. Love you guys too. And we got Lando watching over us. We got Lando. Tomorrow's May the 4th. Sorry I can't be with you guys on that, but he's watching over us. We got Chunk. Bob from Bob's Burgers. Bob Belcher. Anybody ever play Portal 2? That's what that's from. Okay, I gotta stop. I'm just having a good old time here. Now that we're done, just chilling. All right, yes, may the force be with you in this exam. All right, I am reading from 7:06 p.m. right now, submitted at 7:06 p.m. Bash Craw. Shout out to Mr. Hull's We the People class. Thank you for all you do for us. Hunter 11 Mose. Shout out to the GOAT, Mr. Valley. The Knowings Music. And you're just going crazy tonight, man. Appreciate that. Thank you, Heimler, the Social Studies GOAT. I've been here through AP World, A Push, AP Gov, and all the skibbity 6-7 egg in the sock super chats. Thanks for everything. I love it. You're welcome, and thank you. Izzy Rose. Shout out to David Hibbard, the best teacher. Annabelle Schultz. Mr. Yarnall's period 2 government class. Hey, guys. Luke Walt, 27. Power clap for Mr. Hotby on 3. 1, 2, 3. Is that a part? Somebody, yeah, people were asking me to do like 5 big booms last year. I don't even know what that was. I find out so much after these, and I go to my kids and we talk about this, and I'm like, oh, what is that? And they're like, they explain it to me. And I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't do that. They asked for 5 big booms. I'm like, okay, boom, 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 boom. It's not what they were asking for, but I hope the power clap, is that a thing? Is that a new thing that I don't know about? I don't know. But I hope I did you justice there. Cookie Club. This is from 7:08 p.m. Shout out to Dr. McCurdy and say period 3 is getting 5s. They sure are. Ian Dogie. Shout out Mr. Kramer, second period DHS. Eric CZ. Shout out Miss Lowery at Rollsville High School. We are all getting 5s. All getting 5s. Yes, you are. My name's Jonathan. Have you ever read those books behind you? Yeah. Sure have. Sure have. It's so funny. Sometimes people ask me like, oh, is it a green screen? No, no, it's real. It's, I think people don't believe that a person can read for fun, you know? But yeah, no, I could probably pick one off that I haven't read. I don't know, but yeah, for the most part. Paul 123 history. Shout out Miss Diliberto, period 5 from PHS from Paul. Anna Chambers, Miss Carino, PCHS, Cinema 2491. This is Rajasi. Your videos are lifesavers. I was wondering, as a suggestion, if you can make AP Micro videos too. Also, can you shout out Ms. Hutchins from Weddington High School? I have never taught AP Micro. I've taught Macro, and I don't know. I don't know. But I'm already breaking the hearts of AP Euro students and Human Geography students because I can't physically do all the reviews. I don't want to keep adding subjects and be like, I don't want to be a heartbreaker. You know what I'm talking about? All right, Gavin is Gavin. This is at 7:11 p.m. Shout out Mr. Smith from GJHS. Better than Mr. Bills. Oh my. Gomig. Been following you since freshman year and now about to graduate. Congratulations. Thanks for all the study streams over the years. Shout out to Mr. Mack and his AP Gov class for their hard effort. Go Cobras. Neth 9354. Yo Heimler. Shout out to Kenneth, Omar, and Ethan. Chicken Kid 60. Shout out to the best AP Gov teacher, Mr. Stewart. Oliver.fbs. Shout out to Mr. Biglari from the Galloway School. He's the best teacher ever, and we are all going to Harvard. Hey, absolutely. Good luck. Sophia Gant. Shout out to Ms. Cribbles, AP Gov, Miss Womack's A-Push, and Mrs. Bliss's AP World at Cape Central High School. And tell Alicia Baker to lock in. Alicia, you heard Sophia. 404 Proxy. This is at 7:13 p.m. This is my final stream of yours since I'm graduating this year. Truly thank you for everything you have done. I miss this yearly tradition. Well, thank you so much. Give some love to Proxy in the chat there. Let them know your congratulations for graduating. Yeah, I'm happy for you. Captain Blue 5096, fourth and final year of being carried through AP. Shout out to my best Gov Econ teacher, Mr. Nunez at Miami Arts Charter. Thanks for everything. Glad to have you around. Frankie Alvarez, shout out Mr. Moray. Mr. Moray, don't knock on his door. Don't knock on his door. That's how it's emphasized. Johnny Cunningham, shout out Mrs. Bennett, a.k.a. the Onceler. All the trees she cuts down to make us packets. Please talk about Louisiana versus Calais and Shaw v. Reno for a sec. I talked about Shaw v. Reno yesterday, and I'm sure I've talked about the other one somewhere else. I don't think I can go into it right now. Got a lot of these to get through. Love you, though. Abby Flates. Shout out Mrs. Melcher from EHS, best Gov teacher. Layla, W7G5E. Shout out to the GOAT, Mrs. Keeler. She will be missed. That's sweet. Captain Discount. Shout out the best AP Gov teacher, Miss Brisson. Boy, please, 2645. Shout out the best class, Mrs. Murphy, 6th period. All right, we're at 7:18 p.m. now. These are submitted 7:18. Okie dokie, EK1YP. Heimler, you carried me in World A Push and now Gov. I have full faith and credit that you will help me get a 5. Shout out to Miss Lehman, our great Gov teacher. Our scores will be as successful at passing as throwing honey buns. I love it. I don't know what it means, but I love it. HKNOZTU. Shout out to Dr. Cole. Isla Moore. Shout out to the best, most goated AP Gov teachers, Miss Roden and Mrs. Taylor from GHS. WFAPS. WFAPS. Shout out Mr. Martinez from Riverbend High School. He's a modern prophet of the AP Gov sphere. Man, love that. Oliver FBS. Shout out Big and the loony liberals of period 2. Zaza Kari. Shout out the GOAT, Mr. Ryan from LHS. All right, I'm reading from 7:22 p.m. now. Purple Pentagons. Telecommunications metadata. You got that right. Justin Cruz, 4397. Shout out to Coach Caudle, AP GoPo 2025 to 2026. All right. Shadow Iffy. Thank you. No message, but thank you. Deep 15. Shout out to the Miss Rutherford, a.k.a. Ruthinator at Ridgewood High School. Dino and Pio will get 5s because of you, Miss Rutherford. Because of you and Miss Rutherford. Oh, because of me? Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I think I got it. All right. Jenna Wong Vu. Can you shout out Mr. Gilmore? It's his birthday on exam day, and E period is better than G period. We love you, Heimler. Happy birthday, Mr. Gilmore. I understand what it's like having a birthday on exam days. It's all been my case since I was a little kid. Simone Sobers. Shout out Miss Allen. Shout out Mrs. Allen at SHA, the best government teacher. Oh, that's so sweet. Someone asked, is that Rumi in front of the Star Wars sign? You know that's Rumi. You know she's about to tell you how it's done. This Rumi is my spirit animal. I just need you to know that. I love Rumi so much. I have several versions of Rumi around. I love this, and I love her. But I've also dabbled in a new spirit animal, and that is Taylor Swift. I've just of late, the last couple of months, fallen in love with Taylor Swift. How come nobody told me she was so good? How come nobody told me? She's so good. I love the crap out of Taylor Swift. But she is not represented on my bookshelves yet because it's so new. But anyway, as I was saying, okay, this is coming from 7:30. TSV Casanui. Shout out to Paul Anthony Albano and his favorite AP Gov students, Ava and Gianna. Anybody else love Taylor with me? Show me. Let's see it. Come on. Nobody. Come on. Yeah, there it is. There it left. There it is. Oh, yes. Oh, marvelous. Okay, as I was saying, Xavier IDK. No message, just a donation. Thank you. Luca Collins, another donation. Thank you. Ponies Too Blunt. Shout out Miss Cunning, the GOAT. Made this year and the content feel meaningful. Really going to miss reviewing before a test with the Heimler video. Well, I'm going to miss you too. I miss you too. Ekin Prodit. Shout out Mr. No, Jack, Charlie, and Luca. There are no sharks in the pool, Mark. Just so you know. Vazify Valor. Roe v. Wade is no longer required, right? It is no longer required, but it is mentioned in the curriculum. So it's not like on the list of required cases that could show up, but you still should know what it does because it can show up in the multiple choice and that sort of thing. But it's not in the list of required cases anymore. Expedic. Shout out, this is 7:41 p.m., by the way. Shout out Mr. Williams and Triple T from Wakefield High School, North Carolina. Vazify Valor again. Who here from HCPSS and MCPS? You heard Vazify. Who's here? Zach BB14. Shout out Mr. Smith from BHS. Tom Pearl is goated. All right, 7:45. David One Gill. Shout out Dr. Morgan, my hero. Kefotifa 3744. Love you, dude. Love you right back. Kifo, Sarsha, Claire, London, Mr. Feasley, Mr. Nesson. Hashtag London isn't getting a 2. Lorena Sanchez. Thanks for making us all understand and keeping it fun. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Sophia McCutcheon. Shout out to Coach Witicha. Best bald teacher and coach. Us baldies got to stick together. Caitlin Kemjor. Thank you, Heimler, for helping me with my last minute studying in AP Gov. You're welcome. My mother recommended you because you're the reason my brother recommended you because you're the reason he got a 5 last year. Well, thank you. Tell your brother I said thanks. Yellow Chan 123. Shout out to Miss Bullis, our big domed tall queen. Harp 1. Thank you, Heimler, for your shiny head and for helping me get 5s on my history APs since sophomore year, going for the 3-peat with Gov. Hey, high 5 on that. Let's get that 5 on the Gov exam. Meggie. This is from 749. Shout out to the GOAT John Laub from Co-op High, and thanks our GOAT Heimler for helping us throughout the year. Megan, Helen, and Kayla. Noor Saladi. Shout out Miss Harrison, the GOAT. Jay Freeman, WP4VI. Can you shout out the Wilson High School students taking the AP Gov exam, even though there are some BBs, bad boys, taught by Mr. Marks? Yes, indeed. L Train Bond. Leif here. Yes, the Norwegian explorer in the flesh. Oh my. I've been watching you for World, A-Push, and now Gov. Thanks so much. You are the GOAT for real. Game on from Coach at CHS. And P.S. Favorite Star Wars movie? Oh, I mean, Empire Strikes Back. No contest. Shout out to, this is VChen7429. This is at 7:50 p.m. Shout out to Mr. M and the D1 Master Rage Baiter. Always making us question if there's a Gov quiz or not. Bob Fish M6M. Shout out to Mr. Reinhardt and tell Tristan to stop being late to class. Also shout out Miss Stein as well. Maya and Andre. Shout out to my AP Gov teacher, Mr. Saul. He loves your YouTube channel. Well, I love him too. Specifically the video where you talk about selective incorporation. Okay. That's great. Love to hear that. Oliver.fbs, no comment, but a donation. Thank you. EZW Sneakerhead 23. Shout out Miss Taylor from Greenbrier High School. Also, Leora, do your bell ringers. Just do them. Just do them. Hold on just one sec. Talk amongst yourselves. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So get your super chats in. Oh, well, it's after 9. So it's off now. It's off. I missed that message. Okay. Talking about bell ringers. All right. Avery Board Cam. 7:59. Do more eggs in more socks. Thank you, Heimler. I love it. All right, HB Cheese for $5. Thank you. Nico Stojic. Shout out to Mr. Rollins class, SFHS, and my boy Steve. Damn it, Kenneth. Shout out Miss Balbian. She got me a 5 on A push. I love it. Gianna Terreno. Shout out to the 6'7" Timbuktu King, Mr. Olmsted, the best HHS government teacher. Also, please curse 5th period Emmanuel and Stewart to get ones. that would go against everything I do. I'll leave the cursing to you. Hopefully it's powerful enough to get what you want done. X Poliber. This is from 807. Shout out Mr. Martin. He's the sussiest baka that taught AP World and Gov. He is the GOAT and milks our brain cows. Glad to hear that. By the way, Paul, Heath, and Ian are getting 5s. Jeepney Survey. Shout out Mr. Wade. Basis as is overrated. Rudra Patel. Shout out Mr. Perry Southwest Guilford High. Mac 1622. Please shout out Mr. O'Neill, best government A-push teacher. Thank you for everything, and his wife, Miss O'Neill, for the food. Aw. We love Heimler and period 4 government at OC. Well, I love you too. Caitlin Kemjor. Shout out to Mr. Neighbors. He's my bestie and my bestie Heron. Caden Henson 09. This is from 8:11 p.m. Shout out Mrs. Camo for not kicking me out of class. Hey, indeed. Appreciate not getting kicked out of class. All right, let's keep going. Let's make these bigger for me. All right. Reading from 8:12 p.m. now. Salty French fries. Happy early birthday, Heimler. Aw, thanks. Appreciate that. Ria Subnani. You're amazing. You the birthday cake. Bless Ria, Layla, Tyler, Ella, Emma, Nadia, Shay. And we are getting 5s. We are getting 5s. And bless Miss Chase, the AP government teacher. Consider yourselves blessed. Arlie Ruiz. Can you shout out Mr. Meeks and his Black Day class? You got it. Ambi Bambi. Shout out to the goat Big V Vento. Cooper Chambers. Shout out Jeb Bush and his hairy ears. Hey, you got it. Elias Cool, ROFL. Shout out Mr. Belton's 4th and 5th period. Mary M 513. Shout out to Mr. Menges for being the best Gov teacher. Dahlia Lopez, 8:18 p.m. Last year donating, cry face emoji. Please wish Mr. Witzel's 1st and 5th period AP Gov classes good luck, and thank you for helping me pass AP World and A-Push. You the GOAT. Brain cow. Love it. Thank you. Got a little tear. One tear floating down my face. All right, Coco Q2Y9G. Thank you so much, Heimler the King. Big thanks to Miss Hall from Paint Branch. She's the GOAT. Antonia and Ruth, your biggest fans. Aw. Thanks, guys. John Optics. Shout out to the most grounded AP Gov teacher, Mr. Coyne. Cannot wait to learn econ. You should be studying. Brighton Butler. Shout out to Mr. Williamson, me, and Reed Vargas 67. Farik Bless Basis CPK, 9th grade, and Sloka, Mahesh, Boomy, me. You blessed. Wolfen 1785. Shout out Mr. Hippensteel and Emery Lloyd. Anna the same backwards as forward. Heimler, thank you so much for making your videos. You're welcome. Thanks for watching them. You're the main reason I'm passing AP Gov, so thank you. Well, I'm so glad to hear that. You're most welcome. And thank you. Maddie Chu, shout out. This is 8:22 p.m. Shout out to Dr. Stout and his Period 7 AP Gov class. Shahir Solomon. Shout out Mr. Powell. He plays your videos in class. Well, that is a great privilege. I thank you for that. I appreciate it. Bruce for real. This is 8:28 p.m. Bruce for real. Shout out Coach Wilkerson and Coach Venus CHS. Daladoit. Shout out Mr. Harpster. Stella Health. Heimler, my goat, please bless me so I can get a 5 on my exam. First AP class and exam. You're carrying me through studying. Oh, that's your first one. Well, you're blessed. Good luck. Atif P2V41. Shout out Mr. Ellis for clutching up my AP Gov. All right, Mr. Ellis. Salty Sunset. Shout out to Mr. Pardo and his mind maps. Frizz594. Can you say shout out to Mr. DeLeon? Atif again. Shout out Mr. Ellis. Mr. Ellis, and for $20, Mr. Ellis must be very loved. So thank you. That's amazing. Morgan Miller X3Y. Shout out Mr. Catuccio. Crafty Lad. This is coming from 8:50 p.m. Please shout out Mr. Krasnewski and Mr. Cahill. Kaya Chronicles. Can you shout out Mr. Consorte? Sure can. OBS 11VB. Thank you so much, Heimler. You've carried me through AP Gov. Also, shout out BJ at Blessed Trinity High School. Also, hi, Megan and Lizzie. I'm glad to hear we got to do it together. Dave Pringle Bingus. Shout out Ms. Glomsky, LCHS, Egg in the Sock. Egg in the Sock, baby. It's a thing. Atif again for $21. My goodness, you guys. Shout out Mr. Ellis from his favorite students, Sasha, Arsenia, Chris, Kenneth, Ishan, Coach King Dion. Thank you for being the best teacher, and we love you. I mean, that's amazing. That's when teachers make that kind of impact and the students want to come on here, it's incredible. So well done. Deviancy. Shout out Mr. Quaintance birthday and our 5th period AP Gov class. Happy birthday. Constitution engraved on our brains, debate skills unlocked, all locked in for 5s on the exam. Dang straight. Polaroids, 1987. Shout out to Dr. Davis for being the best AP Gov teacher anyone could ask for. And that's the last one. That is the last one. I love it. I love it. Well, guys, that's it. That's it. If you happen to be in AP World, I'll be doing that tomorrow night and the next night. If you're in A-Push, I'll be doing that. What is tonight? Sunday? So I don't know, the 2 nights before the exam. But I'm really glad you guys came by. I had really fun. Rumi says goodbye. You guys go get some sleep. It's a school day tomorrow. And I'll be cheering for you. So glad you guys came. Glad we got to do this together. Good night.